Hello, everyone, and I'm glad to see you here at the Amlet Podcast. Over the past several episodes, we've explored the Navajo creation story. We've watched four worlds emerged, saw ceremonies established, met changing woman, and witnessed the birth of the hero twins. Here in episode 15, we're turning to another indigenous creation narrative, but this time from the Iroquois. Although this story is much shorter than the Navajo account, it explores many of the same questions. How did the world begin? Where did human beings come from? How should people understand their relationship to the land? But it answers those questions in its own distinctive way. One of the most important ideas to remember as we begin is that creation stories express a culture's understanding of identity and individually, community, and how that folds in, but then humanity's place within creation. So, as you listen, consider this guiding question: what kind of world does this creation story imagine? And what does that suggest about the people who tell it? So open your copy of the Iroquois Creation Story and follow along with me. Take notes too to support your success on your assignments this week. And here we go. In the great past, deep water covered all the earth. The air was filled with birds, and great monsters were in possession of the waters, when a beautiful woman was seen by them falling from the sky. Then huge ducks gathered in council and resolved to meet this wonderful creature and break the force of her fall. So they arose and, with pennon overlapping pennon, unitedly received the dusky burden. Then the monsters of the deep also gathered in council to decide which should hold this celestial being and protect her from the terrors of the water. But none was able except a giant tortoise, who volunteered to endure this lasting weight upon his back. There she was gently placed, while he, constantly increasing in size, soon became a large island. Twin boys were after a time brought forth by the woman, one the spirit of good who made all good things and caused the maize, fruit, and tobacco to grow. The other spirit was evil, who created the weeds and all vermin. Ever the world was increasing in size, although occasional quakings were felt, caused by the efforts of the monster tortoise to stretch out, or by the contraction of his muscles. We covered a lot of ground there, so let's unpack it a bit. The story opens with water entirely covering the world, and it didn't have any land. So instead, birds filled the sky while powerful creatures inhabit the waters. The world is already alive before humans arrive. So rather than beginning with a conflict, the first major action in this creation story is cooperation. The birds gather in council. Both groups work together to protect the falling woman from the sky. The giant tortoise volunteers to bear the woman's weight. As she rests on his back, the tortoise grows until he becomes an island. So instead of conquering nature, humanity begins because nature makes human life possible. The earth itself is presented as a living being on its own. The woman later gives birth to twin sons. One becomes the spirit of good, associated with the maize, the fruit, and the tobacco, and the other bad one, the evil one, creates weeds and vermin. I can say, gosh, weeds are evil. Both good and evil become permanent parts of creation pretty early. The final image of this paragraph is on the tortoise. The occasional earthquake is explained here as the movements of the great turtle beneath the earth, as if the world itself is alive. And many indigenous traditions describe the continent as Turtle Island. Whether students encounter that phrase elsewhere in the semester or not, this story helps and explain it as an important source for this whole image. It's more colloquially called that. Turtle Island, because we live upon a seemingly living foundation, according to the Iroquois. Our relationship with it encourages respect, unlike the domination we often see between humans and nature still today. And we'll get a pretty big dose of that next week in our class. So let's see the second paragraph, and I'll comment on what you need to know. So, after the lapse of ages from the time of his general creation, the sky holder resolved upon a special creation of a race which should surpass all others in beauty, strength, and bravery. So, from the bosom of the great island, where they had previously subsisted upon moles, the sky holder brought out the 6 pairs, which were destined to become the greatest of all people. The Tuscaroras tell us that the first pair were left near a great river, now called the Mohawk. The second family were directed to make their home by the side of a big stone. The descendants have been termed the Oneidas. Another pair were left on a high hill and have ever been called the Onondagas. Thus, each pair was left with careful instructions in different parts of what is now known as the state of New York, except the Tuscaroras, who were taken up the Roanoke River into North Carolina, where the skyholder also took up his abode, teaching them many useful arts before his departure. This, say they, accounts for the superiority of the Tuscaroras. But each of the 6 tribes will tell you that his own was the favored one with whom Skyholder made his terrestrial home, while the Onondagas claim that their possession of the council fire proved them to have been the chosen people. Later, as the numerous families began scattered over the state, some lived in localities where the bear was the principal game and were called from that circumstance the clan of the bear. Others lived where the beavers were trapped and they were called the beaver clan. For similar reasons, the snipe, deer, wolf, tortoise, and eel clans received their appellations. So it even folds in some future history to put it all together and see all of this in context so that we could have some modern reference for how all of the 6 nations of the Iroquois were made and how they were named. So in this paragraph, the story now shifts from cosmic beginnings to the beginnings of the Iroquois people themselves. Skyholder creates 6 pairs of human beings and places them in different regions. Each pair becomes the ancestors of one of the great nations. Rather than remaining together in one place, the families are intentionally distributed across the landscape. And so geography is inextricably linked to the communities of the Iroquois. The the Tuscarora version of the story emphasizes that Skyholder remained among them for a time, teaching useful skills before departing. The text also notes that other Iroquois nations preserve different versions of this tradition. Each community remembers its own relationship with Skyholder a little bit differently. The story concludes with explanations of clan origins. So you have the bear, the beaver, the wolf, the deer, the tortoise, the eel, and the snipe. Therefore, each nation receives a homeland. I love that the nations have their own identity within a larger cultural fabric. Now that we've explored both the Navajo and the Iroquois creation stories, let's look at some similarities. So, first, they both begin before human civilization. So, it's nature first. Both explain how order gradually emerges. Both connect humanity closely with the natural work, and both establish customs, identity, and relationships that continue into the present. And then, of course, at the same time, they tell those stories very differently. The Navajo story unfolds over multiple worlds and generations, but the Iroquois it's much more concise. They get to the point. It moves quickly from creation of the earth to the origins of the people themselves. So the Navajo are going to emphasize emergence, while the Iroquois focus on cooperation among animals and all beings on Turtle Island. So, as we begin studying early American literature, and this really is just the beginning, it's important to recognize that Indigenous peoples already possessed rich literary traditions long before European contact. These stories preserved and still preserve um, memory, performance, ceremony, and community values. And that means American literature begins with native histories, philosophies, political systems, and literary traditions rich and intact before the Europeans arrive. So, to finish this episode on the Iroquois, remember that guiding question from the beginning of the episode that I like to do. So, what kind of world does this creation story imagine, and what does that suggest about the people who tell it? Well, they certainly privilege cooperation, as I said before, but I love that identity grows through their relationships with the land, animals, and one another. All right. So thank you, as always, for tuning in to the AMLET podcast. I would love for you to stay curious and keep reading, and I will see you soon for my next idea. Take care.